In the heart of the American desert, a wild Mustang's life was precariously hanging by a thread. Shadow, a horse born to run free, had fallen into a trap intended for another creature. His bloody and injured state seemed to seal his fate until a stranger appeared. Caleb Rivers, a rescuer willing to risk everything to save him. What unfolded next would challenge everything you know about the power of courage and the meaning of fighting for a life, no matter how faint the hope may seem. Prepare for a tale that will stir your soul and redefine resilience. The desert stretched endlessly beneath the scorching sun, with the dry wind stirring small clouds of dust. Caleb Rivers squinted into the distance, his weathered face set with determination. He had been tracking the movements of wild mustangs for days, but today felt different. An unsettling silence hung in the air, a stillness that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. His boots crunched on the rocky ground as he made his way toward a distant ridge, the sound of his footsteps mingling with the distant whinnying of wild horses. Yet it wasn't the sound of freedom that caught his attention. It was something darker, a faint cry that resembled a scream. He quickened his pace, adrenaline surging as he approached the source of the sound. His heart raced as he crested the ridge, and what he saw nearly stopped him in his tracks. In a small clearing surrounded by scrub brush and jagged rocks lay a wild mustang, a stallion ensnared in a hunter's trap, his powerful legs twisted painfully in the steel jaws of the snare, blood staining the ground around him. Caleb froze for a moment, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't just any horse. This was Shadow, a mustang known for his untamed spirit, sleek black coat, and eyes that seemed to pierce right through you. He had roamed these desert lands for years, now helpless and trapped in a brutal snare, enduring excruciating pain. Damn it, Caleb muttered under his breath as he rushed down the incline toward the injured horse. His mind raced. Time was of the essence. Shadow was strong, but without immediate help, he would bleed out. Caleb had witnessed this before, wild horses abandoned to die in agony, but today would be different. He wouldn't let that happen. Kneeling beside Shadow, he spoke in low, soothing tones. "Easy, boy. I'm here. I got you." Shadow's eyes were wide with fear and pain, locked onto Caleb's, but the stallion remained still, his breathing shallow, each exhale sending a puff of dust into the air. Caleb understood that the trap had been set carefully, remnants of human cruelty leaving their mark in the desert. Without hesitation, he reached into his pack for the tools he needed, a pocket knife, rope, and metal pliers. He set to work, being careful not to startle the Mustang further. Shadow's muscles tensed under Caleb's touch, but the stallion made no attempt to escape. Caleb felt the weight of his decision pressing down. One wrong move could cost the horse his life. "Hold on, buddy. You're going to make it." Caleb's voice was steady, even as his pulse raced. He knew all too well how fragile life could be in these harsh conditions. What felt like an eternity passed, but Caleb finally managed to loosen the trap's jaws. With one final pull, he freed Shadow's leg, but the Mustang collapsed into the dirt, shaking with exhaustion. Caleb had done it. The horse was free, but the more difficult part lay ahead, getting him back to safety. Shadow's injuries were severe, and the journey would be grueling for both man and horse, but Caleb was determined not to leave him behind while hope still existed. The relentless desert sun beat down mercilessly as Caleb gently supported Shadow, helping him rise to his feet. The stallion's leg hung limply, swollen and bruised from the trap, and his body trembled with fatigue. Shadow's once defiant amber eyes now reflected an unfamiliar vulnerability. Caleb knew the path ahead would be challenging for both of them, but they still had a journey to complete. With each step, Shadow's hooves scraped against the rocky terrain. The Mustang had endured much, but was not ready to give up just yet. His instincts remained sharp, even in his battered state. Caleb had seen this resilience in many wild horses before, their unbreakable will to survive against the odds. "Come on, boy, you've got this," Caleb murmured softly but firmly. He had witnessed more than his share of suffering in these deserts, both among humans and animals. However, this felt different. Rescuing Shadow transcended the act of saving a horse. There was something profound about Shadow, as if even in his broken condition, he was fighting for something greater, his freedom, his spirit. As Caleb led Shadow toward a nearby ravine, he surveyed the landscape. The harsh, endless expanse of desert stretched out before him, filled with nothing but dust and scrub brush for as far as the eye could see. He knew he had to find shelter and food for the Mustang before the sun set. The last thing Caleb needed was to be stranded out here without protection as nightfall brought with it freezing temperatures and predators. They navigated the ravine with Caleb guiding the Mustang steadily. The air was thick with heat, but Caleb couldn't afford to stop. He needed to keep moving. Time was running out for Shadow, and the Mustang's injuries were worse than Caleb had first realized. Every step the stallion took seemed to drain him more, and Caleb could feel the burden of their journey weighing down on him. As they approached a narrow crevice in the rocks, Caleb allowed himself a brief rest, his breath shallow but somewhat relieved. The Mustang collapsed on the ground, his chest rising and falling as he lowered his head in exhaustion. Caleb crouched beside him, inspecting the horse's wounded leg. The injury was deep, but it was the overall fatigue that concerned him most. Shadow's entire body seemed to be shutting down, his muscles worn out from pain and effort. "Easy, boy, we're almost there," Caleb whispered, gently stroking Shadow's matted mane. The Mustang didn't react, his eyes heavy with fatigue. Caleb pulled a first aid kit from his bag and started to tend to the injury, knowing that what Shadow needed wasn't just medical care, but also reassurance that he wasn't alone. A sudden sound interrupted Caleb's thoughts. Footsteps. They weren't the usual sounds of desert creatures. These were human footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Caleb's heart raced. He couldn't risk being seen out here, especially since people might not understand why he was helping a wild Mustang. Some might even try to capture the horse or report him. With a quick glance over his shoulder, Caleb reached for his rifle, the cold metal a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked in this world. The footsteps grew louder, and Caleb's pulse quickened. There was no choice but to hide. Without hesitation, he grabbed Shadow's reins, pulling the Mustang deeper into the crevice and urging him to remain as still as possible. The footsteps grew closer, and soon a shadow fell over them both. Caleb's body tensed as his grip tightened on the rifle, ready to defend the Mustang, but the voice that followed caught him completely off guard. Caleb Rivers came the voice, familiar and calming. It was Lena, the veterinarian and his closest friend. Caleb exhaled in relief. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. "What the hell are you doing out here, Caleb?" Lena's voice softened when she saw the Mustang, his injured leg barely able to hold him up. "I couldn't leave him," Caleb replied, his voice thick with emotion. "He's a Mustang, and he deserves more than this. I couldn't let him die out here." Lena crouched beside Caleb and examined Shadow's injuries. "You're a damn fool sometimes, you know that. But I understand. You always were stubborn when it came to these horses." Caleb looked at her, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I'm not letting him go through this alone, Lena. I just need a little help." Lena nodded, her expression a mix of concern and admiration. "All right, let's get him back to my clinic. We can do more there, but you need to keep him moving. He won't make it if we don't." The weight of her words settled heavily on Caleb. This was more than just a rescue. It was a fight for survival, both for a Mustang that was born to run wild and for Caleb who was determined to help him. The days seemed to blend together as Caleb and Lena worked tirelessly to nurse Shadow back to health. The clinic, nestled in the desert foothills, was small but well-equipped, a sanctuary for injured animals. Caleb had brought in many horses before, some hurt by ranchers or escaping poachers, but this case was different. Shadow wasn't just any Mustang. He was a symbol of freedom, a wild creature who had lived on his own terms. Now he was reliant on Caleb and Lena. While Lena had cleaned and dressed the wound, the swelling in Shadow's leg was stubborn. "We need to keep him still for a few days," Lena advised, applying an ointment to the injury. Her hands were gentle, but Caleb could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She hadn't slept much since helping to bring Shadow in. "I know," Caleb replied, his voice heavy, "but I can't keep him locked up forever. He needs to run again. He's not like other horses." Lena shot him a pointed look, her voice both soft and firm. "You're not going to push him too hard, Caleb. He's not ready to run yet." "I won't," Caleb promised, though his voice betrayed some doubt. Every part of him wanted to return Shadow to the wild, where he belonged. Time seemed to slip away with each passing day spent in the clinic, and Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that it was slipping away from them both. As the days passed, Shadow's condition slowly improved. The swelling in his leg began to subside, and though he still limped, he stood straighter. Caleb took every opportunity to sit by his side, speaking to him in low tones. He wasn't sure if Shadow could understand, but he liked to think that he did. There was something in the way Shadow's eyes followed him, something that suggested the bond between them was deepening, even if the Mustang couldn't speak. The bond wasn't just one-sided, though. At first, Shadow had been skittish, pulling away whenever Caleb tried to touch him, but over time the Mustang began to relax in his presence. Shadow would allow Caleb to rub his neck, nuzzle his mane, and even eat from his hand. It was slow progress, but it was progress. One afternoon, Caleb decided to take Shadow outside for a short walk around the clinic, despite Lena's advice against it. He couldn't help himself. Shadow needed to stretch his legs. Caleb gently led the horse out to a small corral just beyond the clinic. Shadow's steps were unsteady at first, but with every stride, Caleb saw a flicker of the stallion's former strength. His eyes shone with determination, and Caleb couldn't help but smile as he watched Shadow move more fluidly. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Caleb whispered, filled with admiration. Shadow seemed to understand, his ears flicking toward Caleb as his steps grew more confident. Just as Caleb began to relax, a loud, shrill noise pierced the calm, freezing both him and Shadow in place. Caleb's heart raced. The sound was unmistakable. It was the cry of a helicopter. "They're coming for him," Caleb muttered, his stomach twisting with anxiety. That helicopter wasn't just a random noise. It signaled that a trap was being set. The authorities and ranchers were aware of Shadow, and if they discovered his location, it would spell trouble. Caleb cursed under his breath, turning sharply toward Lena's clinic. The Mustang was still too weak to escape a helicopter, and Caleb realized it wouldn't be long before the authorities would be tracking them down. He couldn't afford to lose Shadow now, not after everything they had endured. Without hesitating, Caleb grabbed the reins, leading Shadow back into the safety of the clinic barn. The Mustang's eyes were wide with fear, his muscles tense, and Caleb's heart raced as he fought against panic. He couldn't let anyone take Shadow from him. Not now, not ever. "Lena," Caleb shouted as he rushed inside. "They're coming. We need to move him now." Lena's face paled when she saw the urgency in Caleb's eyes. She didn't need to ask why. "I'll get the truck ready," she said quickly, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "You need to stay with him. Don't let anyone near this place." Caleb nodded, his pulse pounding in his ears. This was the moment he had dreaded, but he refused to give up, not on Shadow, not on their journey. He wouldn't let anyone tear them apart. The days that followed felt like a fragile truce. Caleb and Lena managed to keep Shadow hidden from the authorities, but Caleb couldn't shake the dread weighing on him. Every sound, every rustle in the wind sent him into alert mode. He remained constantly on edge, watching for the shadow of a helicopter or the sound of approaching vehicles. The world outside had become perilous for Shadow, and Caleb was determined to shield him. Lena insisted they keep moving. "The longer we stay here, the easier it will be for them to track us," she warned. "We have to get him out of the desert, Caleb. We need to relocate to a more remote area where no one will find him." Caleb reluctantly agreed, knowing Lena was right, but the idea of taking Shadow farther from the safety of the clinic filled him with anxiety. The Mustang wasn't fit for long travel yet. His legs still ached. Although his spirit remained wild, the physical toll of the past few days weighed heavily on him. Caleb could see the weariness in Shadow's eyes and the subtle limp in his step that hadn't fully healed. "I'll make sure he's ready," Caleb promised Lena, but deep down, he wondered if they had enough time. The night before their planned departure, Caleb stood by Shadow's side in the dim light of the barn, watching the Mustang graze quietly in the corner. The tension between them was palpable, a shared understanding of what lay ahead. Shadow was gaining strength, but Caleb knew the journey would be grueling. The Mustang would need every ounce of willpower to survive what was coming. As Caleb reached out to gently stroke the horse's mane, he felt an unexpected weight in his chest. He had grown attached to Shadow in a way he hadn't anticipated. There was something about the Mustang, both untamed and noble, that reminded Caleb of his own struggles. They were both survivors, fighters in a world determined to crush them. "We'll get through this," Caleb whispered to the Mustang, his voice barely audible in the barn's quiet. "We have to." Suddenly, a distant sound broke the stillness, a low rumble of engines. Caleb's heart skipped a beat as he tensed, straining to hear. The sound was faint but unmistakable. It was a convoy, and it was getting closer. "Lena," Caleb muttered urgently, rushing to the back of the barn where she had been preparing supplies. "They're here. They found us." Lena's face drained of color as she rushed to Caleb's side, her eyes wide with fear. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Listen," Caleb hissed, placing his hand on the door. The sound of engines grew louder, now undeniable. "We don't have much time." Caleb's mind raced. The authorities and ranchers were coming for Shadow. They had tracked him down, and it was no longer just about getting him out of the desert. They had to move, and they had to move now. "We need to go now," Caleb said firmly, though his heart hammered in his chest. There was no time to waste. Lena nodded, grabbing her bag and keys. "I'll meet you by the truck." "Hurry." Caleb glanced at Shadow one last time, his stomach churning with uncertainty. The Mustang had no idea what was happening. He didn't understand the danger approaching, but Caleb did. He had to protect him, to keep him safe. Taking a deep breath, Caleb grabbed the reins and led Shadow out of the barn. The Mustang hesitated, sensing the change in the air, but Caleb gently urged him forward. The cool night air was thick with tension, and Caleb's senses were heightened. He had no idea who was coming for them, but he knew they couldn't afford to wait and find out. Lena was already in the truck, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. Caleb quickly climbed into the passenger seat, his eyes never leaving the road. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the rough terrain ahead. They had to escape far from the clinic before anyone could catch up to them. "Hold on, Shadow," Caleb muttered under his breath. "We're not giving up on you." The Mustang walked alongside the truck as Caleb guided him through the rocky desert path. Progress was slow. Each step was still a challenge for Shadow, but Caleb refused to stop. They had come too far and fought too hard to reach this point. As they reached the desert's edge, Caleb dared to glance back. The truck's headlights cut through the night, but beyond them, in the shadows of the canyon, he thought he saw a figure. Someone had been watching them. "Damn it," Caleb whispered, his gut sinking. They weren't safe yet. The danger wasn't over. It had only just begun. The truck rattled along the dusty road, its tires kicking up clouds of dirt as it sped through the rugged terrain. Caleb clutched the seat tightly, his eyes darting to every passing shadow, every creak of the truck's frame. Every gust of wind set him on edge. Shadow continued walking beside them, his body straining from the long journey, but Caleb refused to stop. Not now, not when they were so close. Lena remained silent beside him, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. Caleb sensed her anxiety, her fear that time was running out. They were heading deeper into the desert, into an unfamiliar territory, but it was the only place that might offer them hope. The Mustang needed rest, and Caleb decided they would make camp for the night before continuing their trek at dawn. "I think we're far enough now," Caleb said quietly, exhaustion lacing his voice. "We can stop here and give Shadow a break." Lena nodded, her hands still tight on the wheel. "Are you sure this is safe?" "It's the best we can do," Caleb replied, knowing there was no such thing as safety anymore. He had learned that much over the past few days. They had made it this far, but that didn't mean they were out of danger. It only meant they had a few more miles to go before the real challenge began. They pulled off the main road into a small, secluded canyon. The high stone walls on either side provided some cover from prying eyes. Caleb turned off the engine, and the sudden silence made him realize how loud his heart had been pounding. "We'll set up camp here," Caleb said, jumping out of the truck. "Lena, help me get Shadow inside the makeshift pen." Lena followed, her eyes scanning the horizon. The last thing they needed was to be caught out in the open. Caleb understood they couldn't risk sleeping outside tonight, not with the authorities possibly still on their trail. However, as they began setting up a shelter for the night, something fell off. Caleb couldn't quite identify it, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. His instincts warned him that they weren't alone. The sound of footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. Caleb froze, his heart racing. He turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, a man in dark clothing, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Caleb," the man said softly, as if he had been anticipating this moment. "I knew I'd find you here." Caleb's stomach dropped as the realization hit him. He recognized this man, Travis Turner, an old acquaintance from his past. Once a friend and confidant, Caleb had learned that not all friendships were meant to last. "Travis," Caleb's voice faltered as he stepped back, his mind racing. "What the hell are you doing here?" Travis stepped closer, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "I could ask you the same thing. I've always wondered what it would take for you to risk everything for a horse. You've always had a soft spot for them, haven't you?" Caleb's heart pounded in his chest. "Stay away from me, Travis. Stay away from Shadow." The words felt heavy, thick with betrayal. Caleb had once trusted Travis, even working alongside him, but he knew that Travis had always been more concerned with money than anything else. "I was going to let you go," Travis said, his voice almost regretful. "But then I realized something. You don't know what you've got until it's gone. Maybe I could offer you a deal. Let me take the Mustang off your hands, and I'll make sure you and Lena get away clean. No more trouble." Caleb felt his blood run cold. "You're trying to sell him," he spat, disgusted. "That's what this is about. You want to sell Shadow to the highest bidder." Travis smiled, a cold, calculating grin that made Caleb's blood boil. "Not exactly, but I can get you good money for him. You don't have to keep running, Caleb. You have an opportunity here, a chance to make it all go away." The words hung in the air like poison, seeping into Caleb's mind. He understood this wasn't merely about money, it was about control. Travis had always viewed everything in terms of profit and loss, indifferent to the horse, Caleb, or Lena. He only cared about his own gain. "I'd rather die than let you have him," Caleb growled, his fist clenched at his sides. For a moment, Travis seemed taken aback, but then he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that chilled Caleb to the bone. "So be it. But remember, Caleb, you can't outrun the people you owe, and there's no hiding in the desert." With that, Travis turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving Caleb and Lena in stunned silence. The betrayal stung deeper than anything Caleb had ever felt. He had trusted Travis, and now that trust lay shattered. Caleb's hands trembled as he turned back to Shadow, who stood quietly by the pen, eyes wide with curiosity. "Don't worry, boy," Caleb whispered, his voice barely audible. "I won't let him take you. Not now, not ever." Lena stood beside him, her voice soft yet steady. "What now, Caleb? What are we going to do?" Caleb looked at Shadow, then back to Lena. He had no answers, but one thing was clear. They couldn't remain here. The danger was too real. The game had changed, and Caleb was determined to win it. Night fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the soft rustling of wind against the canyon walls. Caleb sat by the fire, flickering light casting long shadows across his face. He hadn't said much since Travis left. His thoughts were a tangled mess of anger, betrayal, and fear. The threat of losing Shadow and being hunted by those he once trusted loomed over him like a dark cloud. Lena sat nearby on a large rock, staring into the distance. The weight of their situation was almost unbearable, and Caleb could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the same doubt gnawing at him. They were running out of time. Every moment spent in the canyon brought them closer to capture. "Caleb," Lena's voice broke the silence, soft but edged with desperation. "What are we going to do? Travis isn't going to give up. He's already shown us what he's capable of. We can't stay here much longer." Caleb didn't respond immediately. His mind raced for a plan, but nothing seemed viable. There was only one way to escape Travis' grasp, but it came with a cost Caleb wasn't sure if he was ready to pay. "We can't keep running," Caleb finally said, his voice thick with resolve. "We'll head east toward the mountains. It's far enough that no one would think to look for us there, and there's a small town near the border. I have a contact there who will help us." Lena looked at him, brow furrowed. "Are you sure? We've been running for days. Shadow's barely holding on, and what about you? You're exhausted." "I don't have a choice," Caleb replied, his voice hardening. "If we don't keep moving, we'll be caught. And if they take Shadow, it'll all be over. Lena sighed, her shoulders slumping. She understood the gravity of the situation, but also recognized how much it was wearing on Caleb. She knew he wasn't just fighting for the Mustang anymore. He was fighting for something deeper, something personal. His loyalty to Shadow had become a symbol of his struggle for freedom, for his own redemption. "We'll do whatever it takes," Lena said quietly, determination flickering in her eyes. "But you need to promise me something, Caleb. Promise me you won't do anything reckless. You can't sacrifice yourself for him." "Not again." Caleb met her gaze, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He had always put others first, thinking of the bigger picture, but in that moment, he realized he couldn't do this alone. He couldn't bear the burden of their survival on his shoulders any longer. "I promise," he said softly, though deep down, he knew that promise might not be enough. He didn't know how much longer he could maintain the facade of control, but for now, it would have to suffice. As they packed their belongings, the tension between them was palpable. There was no time for long goodbyes or sentimental moments. They needed to move quickly before Travis returned with reinforcements or the authorities found them. Caleb's heart raced as he helped Shadow into the makeshift pen, securing the horse with the limited supplies they had left. The Mustang looked up at Caleb with understanding eyes, devoid of fear, only calm acceptance. It seemed as if Shadow knew their journey had reached a critical juncture, that the stakes were now too high to turn back. "Are you ready, boy?" Caleb whispered, filled with both admiration and sorrow. "We're going to make it through this, I promise." Just as the words left his lips, a low rumble echoed from the distance. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. The sound was unmistakable, the roar of an engine. Travis was back. Lena's eyes widened in alarm. "We need to go, Caleb, now." Without thinking, Caleb grabbed Shadow's reins and tugged gently, urging the horse to move. The Mustang hesitated for a moment, sensing the urgency, then broke into a slow canter. Caleb followed closely, his legs aching with every step. Lena was already in the truck, the engine roaring to life as she steered toward the canyon's exit. But as Caleb reached the edge of the canyon, a sharp voice shouted from behind, "Stop right there." Travis' voice echoed off the canyon walls, filled with venom. "You can't run from me. I'm not done with you yet." Caleb's heart hammered in his chest as he saw Travis' truck creeping closer, its headlights blinding him in the night. He had a split second to decide, stay and confront Travis or keep running. The choice was clear. "Go, Lena," Caleb shouted, his voice breaking through the tension. "Get out of here. I'll hold them off." Lena's eyes widened with fear, but she didn't hesitate. She floored the accelerator, and the truck sped into the darkness. Caleb didn't look back. His focus was solely on getting Shadow to safety. He could hear Travis' truck gaining on them, the roar of the engine deafening. Caleb's pulse quickened. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. He would fight for Lena, for Shadow, for his freedom. The night was silent except for Caleb's heavy, labored breaths as he urged Shadow forward. The Mustang's hooves echoed on the dusty trail, the sound mingling with the distant roar of Travis' truck, closing in like a predator stalking his prey. Caleb's mind raced, heart pounding in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins. He couldn't stop. He couldn't let Shadow down now. The Mustang had endured so much already, and his courage was the only thing preventing Caleb from breaking under the weight of it all. He glanced over his shoulder, but the truck's headlights blinded him. Travis was too close for comfort. Caleb felt the heat of the pursuit, the anger in the air almost tangible, but he didn't have time to waste. The mountain pass they were approaching was steep and treacherous. It was their only hope for escape. If they could make it to the narrow opening, they might have a chance. However, the road ahead was windy and narrow, with cliffs rising on either side, allowing little room for maneuvering. If Travis had backup, there would be no escaping. Caleb tightened his grip on the reins. Shadow was tiring, and Caleb knew he couldn't push the horse much farther. The truck's headlights reflected in the rearview mirror, momentarily blinding him, but Caleb focused on the path ahead. Lena had made it to safety, at least for now, but what about him? What if he wasn't fast enough? What if Travis caught up to them? No, he couldn't think like that. He had to stay focused. He had to survive, for Shadow, for Lena, for everything they had fought for. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. Caleb's eyes widened as a loud, earth-shattering noise erupted from behind. The truck skidded to a stop, its engine revving in frustration. Caleb risked a glance over his shoulder. Travis had exited the vehicle. "Caleb!" Travis' voice echoed across the canyon, a mix of rage and desperation. "You think you can just run away? You'll never escape me. I'm taking you both down." The words struck Caleb like a physical blow. He had to act quickly. "Shadow!" Caleb whispered urgently, squeezing the reins. The Mustang's pace slowed, his breath coming in short gasps. But Caleb knew they had one last shot. If they could reach the ridge ahead, they might be able to outmaneuver Travis. However, Shadow's legs were trembling from exhaustion, and Caleb felt it too. His own body was on the verge of collapse. But he couldn't stop now. "Please, boy," Caleb muttered, urging the horse on just a little further. In that moment, Shadow's eyes flicked toward Caleb, and he saw something that filled him with strength. Quiet, unwavering trust. Shadow wasn't going to let him down. Not now. With one final surge of energy, Caleb spurred the horse forward, pushing through pain and fear. The mountain pass was so close. They were almost there. They just needed to make it through the narrow opening ahead. But as they reached the ridge, something unexpected happened. The ground crumbled beneath them. Caleb's heart dropped as Shadow stumbled, his hooves sliding on the loose dirt. Time seemed to freeze for a split second as Caleb instinctively reached out, trying to grab the reins and pull Shadow back from the edge. But it was too late. With a violent, heart-stopping crash, Shadow slipped, and Caleb's world spiraled out of control. He grabbed the horse's mane, their bodies flailing as they tumbled down the slope. The sound of their fall was deafening, and everything went dark. As the dust settled and the night grew quieter, Caleb knew the road ahead would be fraught with new challenges, but he had no regrets. Shadow had given everything to protect him, and together they had proven that even in the darkest moments, courage and trust could light the way. The bond between man and horse was unbreakable, and with each step forward, they were stronger than ever.